Welcome back to another Explainer. I've been so excited to unpack today's topic with you because we're looking at nothing less than humanity's next giant leap. I mean, think about it. We've conquered the skies, we've walked on the moon, and right now, space agencies across the globe are setting their sights on something much, much further away. Today, we're unpacking the absolute monumental engineering and logistical puzzle of a crewed mission to Mars. How do we actually get there? How in the world will we survive once we land? And what is it going to take to pull off the incredibly complex task of bringing human beings safely back home? It is just a brilliant subject to dig into, so let's get right to it. First, I want you to just place yourself directly into the shoes of an astronaut in deep space. Picture this. You wake up one morning, you float over, and you look outside the small window of your spacecraft. But in front of you, it isn't the familiar blue and green of Earth. No, it's a massive, desolate red planet, Mars. You've been traveling through the absolute void of deep space for months. You're literally millions of miles away from everything you have ever known, and you are finally preparing to make history. It's an incredibly atmospheric thought, right? Gives you goosebumps. But moving from that romantic vision to actual reality, well, that requires overcoming some of the greatest technical hurdles in human history. Okay, let's dive into this. How would a mission to Mars actually work? Because, as you can probably guess, it doesn't simply mean strapping a crew of astronauts to the top of a heavy-lift rocket, pointing it toward a red dot in the sky, and hitting launch. This is an immense logistical puzzle. It requires almost every single field of engineering you can think of, from robotics and artificial intelligence to electrical systems and advanced life support, all working perfectly, seamlessly, in tandem. To begin with, we have to look at planetary mechanics, because when it comes to the deep space journey, timing is literally everything. Earth and Mars are constantly moving around the sun at different speeds, which means mission planners are totally bound by strict orbital mechanics. You can't just launch on demand whenever you feel like it. They have to painstakingly wait for the exact right launch opportunity. Specifically, what's called a Human transfer window. This is the precise moment where the spacecraft's trajectory and Mars's orbit will ultimately intersect at the correct location in the future. And once they commit to that incredibly narrow window, the crew is locked in. They're looking at a transit through deep space that will take roughly 7 to 9 months. And what exactly does a crew need to survive for months in the total void of space? Well, a crewed Mars spacecraft would need to function almost like a highly independent miniature space station. Think about packing for a multi-year camping trip, except, oh yeah, you also have to bring your own constant supply of breathable oxygen, water, incredibly robust power systems, and heavy radiation shielding. Add to that the necessary exercise equipment just to fight off muscle atrophy from zero gravity, comprehensive medical bays in case of an emergency, and heavy-duty communication arrays. All of this has to be perfectly managed inside a tight habitat where the crew sleeps, eats, and works, with a life support system continuously recycling literally every drop of moisture. So let's assume the crew survives the months-long journey and finally reaches Mars. Awesome, right? Well, reaching the planet is only half the challenge. Now they actually have to land. The Martian atmosphere is in this absolutely brutal middle ground. See, it's too thin to offer the substantial aerodynamic braking that we rely on when returning spacecraft to Earth, but it is still thick enough to absolutely incinerate a spacecraft that's entering at orbital speeds. This specific lack of atmospheric density makes landing heavy payloads an extreme engineering challenge. This brilliantly illustrates just how tricky Mars really is. To get down safely, the spacecraft enters the Martian sky at an enormous velocity. This triggers a harrowing, rapid-fire sequence just to survive the descent. First, a heavy-duty heat shield has to immediately absorb the extreme thermal shock. Then, the craft uses whatever aerodynamic braking it can muster to bleed off a little speed, which is followed by a massive supersonic parachute deployment. Finally, retropropulsion kicks in, firing rockets downward, coupled with precision automated landing systems to gently set the massive habitat down. Now, NASA has decades of experience landing small robotic rovers this way, sure, but safely setting down a heavy spacecraft filled with human beings and all their life support equipment, that scales the difficulty up exponentially. So they've survived the landing. Amazing. But the moment those astronauts step out, they are entering an environment that is actively hostile to human life. For everyday survival, they're going to rely entirely on a highly complex habitat structure. And to be clear, this isn't just an upgraded tent. A future Mars base has to operate like a living, breathing organism, where a single point of failure means absolute disaster. It needs dedicated sleeping quarters, a scientific laboratory, a fully stocked medical area, secure communications, advanced food systems, water recycling units, reliable power, and heavy-duty air filtration. Every single element of the space must work perfectly, 24/7, without fail. And speaking of that air filtration, that brings us to a surprisingly insidious threat on the surface: Martian dust. I know, it sounds pretty simple, right? It's just dust? But current research highlights some major concerns. Martian dust isn't like the sand on a beach here on Earth. It's incredibly fine, it's highly electrostatic, which means it clings to absolutely everything, kind of like glitter, and worse, it contains toxic chemical compounds called perchlorates. If this dust enters the habitats through the airlocks or gets tracked in on spacesuits, it could expose the crew to really serious health risks. Designing effective dust control is recognized right now as one of the most critical design challenges for keeping the crew healthy. Now, supplying this habitat brings us to one of the most vital concepts in this entire explainer: ISRU, or In-Situ Resource Utilization. The crucial point here is that we simply cannot afford to transport everything from Earth. The weight and the sheer cost would be astronomically high. Therefore, ISRU is the defining technology for Martian survival. The basic idea is brilliant in its simplicity. You use the resources that are already available on Mars instead of carrying everything with you. It's living off the land. For example, instead of bringing heavy tanks of air, future missions could use ISRU technology to process the carbon dioxide-rich Martian atmosphere and produce breathable oxygen directly on the surface. Let's break down exactly where astronauts are going to source their basic, life-sustaining needs using this strategy. Water, which, remember, is essential for drinking, agriculture, and even making rocket fuel, would be sourced by drilling into subsurface ice deposits. Food would be a mix of dense cargo brought from Earth alongside fresh plants grown in carefully controlled greenhouses, which provides both psychological benefits and a little extra oxygen. Power will likely come from a combination of solar arrays and super reliable nuclear surface power units. And as we just discussed, oxygen will be processed right out of the Martian atmosphere. So we've talked about the logistics of surviving on the surface, filtering the air, landing the ship, all that good stuff. But it begs a really interesting question for you all. Out of everything we've discussed so far, what is actually the biggest danger? What do you think is the single most significant threat to the lives of these astronauts? Well, if you guessed running out of food or maybe a crash landing, you'd actually be wrong. When you strip away the romance of space travel, you reveal two stark, invisible dangers: deep space radiation and communication delays. Down here on Earth, our thick atmosphere and our strong magnetic field provide this amazing, substantial protection from cosmic radiation. But out in deep space and on the surface of Mars, astronauts receive a much, much greater exposure. Protecting them requires heavy shielding, carefully designed habitats, continuous monitoring, and really strict emergency procedures. It is a central, ever-present threat. Now, what's really interesting is the communication aspect. Because depending on where Earth and Mars are in their orbits, a radio signal, even traveling at the speed of light, can take several minutes just to travel one way. Imagine a fire breaking out or a sudden depressurization event in the habitat. The astronauts cannot simply radio Houston and wait for immediate instructions. The delay forces the crew to operate with an incredibly high level of autonomy. They have to be completely capable of diagnosing and solving life-threatening problems entirely on their own, literally millions of miles from help. So with all these incredible dangers, the radiation, the isolation, the toxic dust, the terrifying landing sequence, why go? Well, the core objective is absolutely thrilling: the search for life. Mars is one of the most fascinating destinations in our entire solar system because scientists desperately want to know if it was once capable of supporting life and exactly how its environment changed over billions of years. These astronauts won't just be surviving, they'll be working. They'll use advanced pressurized rovers to travel across the enormous surface, investigating geological sites, gathering rocks, soil, and ice, and analyzing them in sophisticated labs. Ultimately, they are going there to answer one of humanity's oldest questions: are we alone? But of course, the mission isn't over once the science is done. Perhaps the most difficult logistical nightmare of all is, how do you get home? Because for most agency plans, a Mars mission isn't just a one-way ticket. Getting the crew back involves Earth departure, arrival at Mars, surface operations, and then pulling off a flawless launch in a Mars ascent vehicle to perform a perfectly timed orbital rendezvous millions of miles from Earth. That's followed by the deep space travel back, and finally Earth re-entry. It is a massive, highly complex chain of events where absolutely every single link must hold perfectly to get the crew back home alive. Let's move on and see how this builds into our current space programs. You might be wondering why there is so much focus right now on returning to the moon. Well, NASA actually describes a sustainable lunar presence as part of the path toward human Mars exploration. The moon is essentially going to serve as our vital testing ground.
Before we send humans to another planet entirely, this Moon to Mars approach allows agencies to test out the habitats, the life support systems, robotics, human performance, and that all-important resource utilization, but much, much closer to home.
Now, regarding the timeline, it is important to be totally objective here and separate confirmed plans from future concepts. Mars 2030 is a vision. It is not a confirmed schedule. There is currently no official confirmed crewed Mars landing locked in for the year 2030. Rather, NASA's stated goal for human exploration of Mars is in the 2030s. Space agencies worldwide, including the ESA, are using this decade as a target timeline. It's the goalpost to develop the necessary robotic exploration and survival technologies that will eventually make a human mission possible.
Which brings us to our final thought. Mars is not just another destination. Establishing laboratories, growing food, and conducting science on another planet is quite possibly humanity's greatest engineering challenge. The question isn't simply whether a rocket can reach Mars. We know it can. The real, provocative question is, can we build a technology that allows humans to actually survive there? Every robotic mission and every new space technology brings us one step closer to finding out. Thank you for joining me on this explainer today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I will see you next time as we continue to unpack the fascinating world around us.